Okay, hello? Kelvin, Rebecca, Cho, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Cho, can you hear us?
Yes, I can
Oh,
hear you.
great. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Gaia, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you. Thanks, Gaia.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
Hi, Byoung-il, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi.
Hi, okay, I can hear you, but a little faint.
Is there any problem?
Yeah, that's a little better, I think. Thank you. We'll start in just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Recording in progress.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our session on responding to changing digital rights priorities in a post-pandemic world. My name is Pavitra Ramanujam. I work with the Association for Progressive Communications. We're a civil society organization and an international network, and we focus on the use of ICTs to achieve social, environmental, and gender justice. We have spoken at length, I think, over the past couple of years at previous APrIGFs as well as other forums on the impact that the pandemic has had on the adoption of technology, and especially how stakeholders such as governments and the private sector have really leveraged the situation in terms of bringing in new policies, bringing in new actions that have, on the one hand, made public participation much more easy and accessible on the internet, but then on the other hand, also granting them more control over digital rights, digital spaces, right? But for digital rights advocates and for other stakeholders, especially civil society, for academia, for the media, I think it has been quite a disruption in terms of the plans that they had, especially around advocacy for digital rights, because of the kind of agendas that have been changed, because of the situation of the pandemic by decision makers, their plans that have been truncated for movement building or advocacy, the relevance of previous strategies because of how the context has changed, and even the shifting priorities in terms of resourcing and sources of funding. And as the dust settles now a little bit on the pandemic, we really want to take stock of the long-term consequences of the pandemic on digital rights and related advocacy priorities, how likely they are to continue, and what we can do in this changed reality. And this is a question that we're also grappling with at APC as part of this year's edition of the Global Information Society Watch, which is an annual research project that is committed to building an open, inclusive, and sustainable information society. And we'll also hear from some of our speakers on some of the excerpts from this research that we're doing this year. With that, I'd like to thank you all once again for being here and introduce our really fantastic panel that we have for you today. We have two speakers who will be joining us remotely, and of course we have three speakers who are with us here on site. First, I'd like to introduce all of you to Gayathry Venkiteswaran, who's joining us remotely. Gaya, if you're able to briefly perhaps share your video. That would be great. Gaya Venkiteswaran is an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia, where she teaches political communication, propaganda, and public relations, as well as communications technology. Gayathry is also a journalist and a media activist for over 20 years and is currently researching media reforms in Southeast Asia. We're also joined online by Byoung-il, who is the president of the Korean progressive network Jinbonet, based in the Republic of Korea, which advocates for human rights in the information society, especially the rights to communication, free speech, and privacy. Byoung-il is also the author of the country report for the 2022 edition of the Global Information Society Watch, and he will be speaking to us about the introduction of surveillance technologies in light of the pandemic in South Korea. And then here with us on stage, we have Fernando Ximenes, who is the founder of the Timorese Association for Progressive Media and Technology, which is a youth-led organization that focuses on progressive media narratives. He's also an editor at the Timoriana Association, which produces interdisciplinary action-oriented research on issues such as national economic development, democratic participation, and environmental issues. We also have with us Darika Bamrungchok, who's a digital rights advocate and a digital safety trainer from Thailand. She started her career in journalism and in the past has worked for Amnesty International Thailand as a campaigner. She also has a master's degree in public policy from the Central European University in Budapest, where she specialized on the use of technology for human rights defenders under authoritarian regimes. And finally, we have with us Farooq Faisal, who is the Regional Director for Bangladesh and South Asia from Article 19. He has over 2 decades of experience working in the field of international development, management and leadership, as well as journalism, media development, and development communications in Asia. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm sure we look forward to a fantastic discussion here today. With that, I'd like to perhaps get us started. Perhaps I could start with you, Gaya. One of the things that we were discussing and that we'd like to discuss in today's panel really is both in the context of media in Malaysia, as well as the overall broad context of Malaysia itself. Could you tell us a little bit about how the situation around digital rights has changed as a result of the pandemic? And more importantly, what are some of the things, the actions that the media or civil society in Malaysia have had to take to respond to some of these changing priorities? Thank you.
Thanks, Pavi, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session, and good afternoon to fellow panel members. I think the discussion about Malaysia, we have to recognize, and I think this might be an experience that many friends and colleagues also have in other societies, in that the pandemic had happened coincidentally, or that there were other political shifts that were happening in societies at that time. So for Malaysia, it's very difficult to talk about just a pandemic without making references to what many of us say was a political coup that happened at the start of the pandemic. So I think it's very important because many actions, many in terms of government interventions, actually what we saw conflated the two, I suppose, developments. And so on the one hand, you had public health issues, global public health issues that required the kind of interventions that we've never seen in a long time, right? So quite legitimate needs in order to manage the pandemic. And then at the same time, we had a political coup. This followed actually 2 years followed what was considered to be a milestone development in terms of elections, where we had a change in government, and that had happened in 2018. So following that elections, the results of that elections, we had seen some opportunities, actually quite positive opportunities for reforms. Unfortunately, at the point of the declaration of the pandemic, the global pandemic, and the political coup, we saw actually a lot of the very small changes, very positive changes that were beginning to take place post 2018 elections, sort of be pushed to the back burner, or in fact be reversed. And so I think any discussions about digital rights, any discussions about expression, the access and ability of the media, has to look at these two very significant developments happening at the same time. And so what we had seen prior to the 2018 elections, where a lot of well-documented reports and monitoring by civil society actors in terms of suppression of freedom of expression, particularly online in the last 10 to 15 years, sort of made a comeback in that sense, yeah? So we were quite, and I would say from civil society perspective and academics as well, very disappointed to see that it was quickly used, the moments were very quickly used in order to return some of the, I would say, very repressive either policies, laws, or actions. Now, one of the significant things that had happened during the pandemic, and is somewhat in a limbo still, is the use of emergency powers during this period, targeting specifically what was paraded as fake news or false information. And I think that's one area in which it became like a wide net that was cast towards activists, towards public who actually had high levels of discontent, and also the media in trying to establish much of the information in relation to the pandemic, the vaccination, procurement issues that were also tied to that. And so it became this wide net that was used again, as I said, as in the past, in order to actually curb dissent. So I would say that in the experience of Malaysia, and again, this is not unique. I think, many of us on the panel will say, well, a lot of us experience the same thing. But really, it marks the very, I suppose, the very nature of societies within Southeast Asia, where the remnants of, or the return of authoritarian measures were observed during that period. And so much of the discussions from the government is reminiscent of what we had in the past and try to advocate for reform, which is to increase controls, to increase restrictions of online expression. And a lot of it today, we would see documentations from civil society groups like the Center for Independent Journalism and SWARAM, Article 19 as well, in which the number of cases of individuals who've been investigated, who've been brought to court, who's had content being taken down through government authorities has been on the rise. So in the last 2 years, we would say that has been actually a significant increase in the actions being taken against individual or group, I suppose, expression and dissent. So tightening of the laws is a major, I would say, major agenda of this post, I would say, the coup government. It remains as a coup government because many of us do think that it was, it's illegitimate in that sense. And so this is actually an agenda of the government. There's been a lot of discussion about social media control, even appropriating what some groups have been discussing at the international level for social media councils. And so this is being appropriated because of the very specific reason to actually monitor and control online speech. And because they recognize that a lot of the groups that, a lot of the companies that run social media platforms are outside of their reach. And so they are looking for easier ways in which they can take down content and also take action against those who express themselves online. We've definitely seen in the last 2 years, this affecting significantly the news media, but also anyone who uses online spaces for their individual expression. The sort of growth in recognition that there are these three big areas, topics that's out of bounds. Yeah, I mean, in the past, it was somewhere of a gray area, but these are narratives that are coming also from the state, in which the three big issues, or they call it the 3R, is race, religion, and royalty. And because a lot of the changes that have taken place, or the developments that have taken place in the 2 years, where I said one is the pandemic, and then the other one is the political coup, and where we've seen emergency laws being used, the role of the royalty as the head of the state has become so much more in the foreground. And so any discussions, any criticisms of legal in nature or questioning measures inevitably gets tied to whether we can question royalty. So that's sedition or seditious. So this narrative of these three areas of sensitive topic, which used to be the sort of, in the whispers and we speak on the side, is actually in the mainstream narrative, which means that any discussion that touches Islam, touches certain race, ethnicity, and royalty, automatically becomes construed as a criticism and becomes construed as sedition. So that's become a lot more obvious in the last 2 years. A lot of the targeting now is also to groups, minorities such as LGBT persons, youths who are now becoming a lot more active, which is a positive sign. But a lot of criticisms against the government, for example, because of unemployment, education opportunities are also being targeted. Now, I do want to I just want to raise two other issues definitely over the course of the 2 years, is the concerns about data privacy, surveillance, data protection. There's definitely been a lot more concern, and this might be a good thing for civil society, in which the awareness of the importance of privacy and data protection is definitely growing because of the concerns of data leaks, for example, or the use of the apps for contact tracing, which has been very controversial in Malaysia, exposing actually the gray area in which data is owned by private and the state, the lack of a legal framework actually to guide the use of these apps and contact tracing apps, still the ambiguity in terms of who actually owns the data and what happens to the data. We see that these apps are now being put forward as super apps, starting with the contact tracing, but actually morphing into something far more grander. For example, recently, you can now use the app which we used to use for contact tracing for the pandemic to register as an organ donor. So there is an intent to actually collect and hold all of these data of individuals in terms of health, and that's actually quite a concern. So I think the flip side of it is that because of the massive data leaks that we have had in the last year, involving both state and privately held data, a lot more people are now concerned about the integrity of the infrastructure, information infrastructure, data infrastructure, and calls for a lot more privacy measures and protection. So I think that is, we can take it as a good sign that people are a lot more concerned about the security of their data. And last point, I will just say that things to monitor, because I know that the issue of sustainability is there, the issue of rights is there. We actually need to keep track as well of the providers, the telcos on the private side, private sector side, the corporate strategies. We've been seeing mergers. We've been seeing a lot of very, very non-transparent deals, particularly in relation to the 5G services. So I'm just putting it out there as issues with regards to the corporate sector that we need to keep an eye on, and where, again, the lack of transparency is a big issue. The potential for, again, data mining, data holding of users, and not knowing really how these are going to be held accountable as far as the corporate sector is concerned, and whether merging of the telco companies to create these large corporations owning, providing ISP services, mobile services, and how that is actually going to impact in terms of governance of the telco sector, as well as digital rights in the coming years. So I'll stop there, but I just wanted to put freedom of expression as a major issue affecting both the mainstream media, social media users, the issue of data privacy, protection, and thirdly, I think looking at trends in the corporate sector, that's something that we also have seen in the last 2 years. Not getting much attention because everyone is very worried about work and pandemic, but I think that's something actually of concern as well. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Gaya, and thanks for placing the issue of what's happened during the pandemic in the larger political context, right, of what's happening in Malaysia. And I know that it is, as you said, a similar situation in other countries in the region as well. And perhaps I can come to you, Darika, next, because I know that there might be some shared trends, perhaps, in your country. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the context in Thailand and how things have shifted over the past 3 years there?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I have like a short presentation, so probably Cho, so can help me to share my presentation as well. I mean, thank you, Pavi, and like good afternoon, everyone here, and then the people like who join online as well. And also like, yep, okay, thank you. So in the today's section that I would like to share my observation and then the experience as of the civil society in Thailand, and also that that I put the title for like very short presentation today, that the Thai pro-democracy movement on the line in the post of the pandemic world. So which is like, I mean, so I grew up in the country that I had experienced at least like three times of military coups. So that is was like defining my both personal and then the working experience in the last, even especially for my working in the last 10 years, and especially for my interest, that is like I haven't been working on is about the social movement and human rights, and especially for the surveillance under the authoritarian regimes. So what we have seen, like how the technology can empower, the citizens, and also can help the people can exercise their freedom of expression, their human rights. And when it comes to the social movement and also for the protests, the online space is make the public mobilization and the protest it seems to be easier than before, and then we have seen in many countries. But also the number of the technologies and the digital rights violation, and then the platform as well. Although as a technology is a powerful to serve digital activism in a country, and then but these kinds of the technology and then the social media platform are the weaponized by the state authorities to target their citizens as well. So for the next slide, please. So yeah, for the context in Thailand that I would like to highlight in the last almost 3 years, especially during the pandemic time, that the situation that happened during this time is a youth lead protest and the social movement, and how the Thai government is using a number of repressive tactics that to target the civil society and the human rights defenders who have like critical voice to against the military government and also the monarchy in Thailand. So okay, probably like can go for the next one. So let me talk a little bit about like what make the ecosystem of the digital authoritarianism in Thailand is kind of like working in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So for the first tactic that is kind of the common use for the Thai government is like judicial harassment and the prosecutions. So in particularly of the using the Computer Crime Act that give the authorities license to monitor and then suppress the online content as well, and also the use of the lèse majesté, or in Thailand that is Article 112 to to prosecute the people who perceive that critical of the monarchy. Also that include the people, who just like simple like post information online or share some information on the social media platforms. And also when the pandemic came to Thailand, and the Prime Minister that say that the public, say to the public that the people would be prosecuted if they abuse the social media to criticize the government, management, or respond to the pandemic situation. And later on that the Thai government announced to use the emergency decree in the name of the control of the pandemic at that time. But it's the implementation to crack down the protester that is happening during the pandemic in Thailand. And it's like the hundreds of the people like prosecuted. And what we are concerned, this kinds of the pandemic measures or policy or mechanisms are not just temporary. So that is one concern as well. And it can be part of the ongoing, the legal harassment, although that the pandemic is is not critical as it's happened before. And in order to control the social media platform and other digital platform, so last year that the Thai government proposed the regulation to regulate the digital platform service in Thailand. So that is this issue that we have to keep monitor what kinds of the implement that the government will use this kinds of law. For the second one is about the internet and the media censorship, including like take down requests. So for example, like, the government requests Facebook and the social media to block, the Facebook group who have, the critical voice to against the monarchy. That has happened in the last 2 or 3 years. The website blocking and also the website is called like change.org that is have the online petition was blocked during that time as well. And another situation is like the government tried to shut down the independent media outlet inside the country. And also the one idea during the protest is kind of quite critical. So the Thai government tried to block the Telegram application, although they realize that it's not easy to block it. And that's why what I have perceived when it's come to, especially during the pandemic as well. So the government is not much using the old way of the internet censorship, like website blockings or the takedown as they did before. But they move from the old style of the internet censorship to have like the information warfare. So it's kind of the content manipulation is kind of the common tactic, especially in the last, 7 year, 8 year after the military coup in Thailand. So which means that the content manipulation or the international information warfare is one of the key tactics that we have seen in Thailand. We call IO or information operation, or in some other countries can be cyber tooth. That is like a state-sponsored information operation that target the citizens, or especially for the human rights defender who have the critical voice in the country as well. But when it comes to that kind of the content manipulation or information warfare, it's not the similar tactic that we are experienced with the internet censorship or the website blocking, which is quite difficult to detect that kinds of the content manipulation as well. So this is a one challenge that we have to work on inside the country. So the last one that I would like to share about the digital surveillance. So this is a main topic that I kind of working on and try to find a better strategy and advocacy, try to push back against especially when it comes to the state-sponsored surveillance technologies. So what we have seen in Thailand, especially after the coup, that we have seen, I mean, at the beginning, we saw that the government is using like low-tech or low-budget surveillance technologies, like starting with CCTVs, or even like they use the GPS device with the activist car to target their movement. Up until that, we realized that we found out that the government is using the Pegasus spyware. So this is changing the way that we have to work on the security inside the country, especially when we have to do the training. So what I would like to pay the attention here, especially when it comes to the surveillance technology and unregulated the surveillance technologies, because it's like, it gives the power to authoritarian country like Thailand, who doesn't have, I mean, enough capacity when it comes to like technical surveillance technologies, but they just like import that kinds of the technology and then use it in the country. Because the question that we always like got from the activists on the ground is like, what is the capacity of the Thai government can do the technical or advanced surveillance technology? But it doesn't mean that they have capacity or not. They just import that kinds of the surveillance technology inside the country. So I think this is the issue that I would like to mention, and then observation as well, especially when it comes to the normalizing the surveillance practice and then the technology inside the country. So I would like to stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darika. Perhaps I think that what you've said, especially around the digital surveillance, is something that might resonate quite a bit with Byoung-il. I know that the situation in South Korea is somewhat similar. Byoung-il, would you like to share with us what you've been researching on this issue, and how things have, digital rights situation has been backsliding in South Korea over the last 2 years?
Hi, sorry, you're on mute. Thank you.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Byoung-il Oh. I'm working for Korean Progressive Network Jinbonet. Thank you for inviting me to this session. As with all of us, the COVID-19 pandemic was a new experience for me, and as a digital rights activist, I have faced new questions about how to balance the prevention of infectious disease and the protection of digital rights. According to the international human rights norms, basic rights may be restricted to some extent for achieving public health goal, but those policies should be based on should use the least right infringing means to achieve that purpose, and should not be imposed arbitrarily or applied in a way that discriminates. However, I'm not an expert on public health, and when a policy was introduced to prevent infectious disease and constrain digital rights, it was not easy for me to determine whether it was the least right infringing measures or not. But through interventions and discussions on those policies over the past 2 to 3 years, we can better understand the problems of those policies and how to improve them. South Korea is one of the countries that has introduced various monitoring and tracking systems in the name of controlling and preventing infectious disease. Korea's quarantine model was described as the 3T model, which means test, treat, test, trace, treat. In other words, the diagnostic testing for people suspected to have contracted the virus, the identification of contact through precise epidemiological investigations, and the isolation and treatment of patient and contact. In order to conduct a precise epidemiological investigation, objective data had been collected to track patients' past movement and identify close contacts, such as mobile phone location information, the use of credit and transportation card, and CCTV footage. In this process, sensitive personal information such as location and information on habits and personal preferences and relationships were inevitably collected and processed. A location tracking device called Safety Band was also introduced to track who leave self-quarantine area without authorization. In addition, the entire nation was regarded as potential patient, so people's movement had to be recorded in advance for epidemiological investigation that may be required in the future. For that purpose, the mandatory entry log policy was implemented, through which records of visit to restaurant or cafe were stored for 4 weeks. This policy is not only confined to patients, but a general monitoring measure targeting all citizens. Korea's quarantine policy has been evaluated as successful in terms of quarantine, but I don't think they are proportional measure in light of international human rights standard. I think the COVID-19 pandemic gave us a big lesson on how to balance the prevention of infectious disease and the protection of digital rights. I stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Byoung-il, and especially for bringing up the point around the need to balance when we are faced with a situation like the COVID-19 pandemic, but then to ensure that rights are not mitigated beyond what is reasonable in those circumstances. And if I can next go to Fernando, because I know that the context in Timor-Leste perhaps might be a little different, and it would be great to hear from you on how things have shaped up there over the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pavi and Bobby. Maybe he was in there online. I think talking about the digital issue in Timor-Leste, it's quite rare because it is an agrarian society. It is an underdevelopment society who are not really integrated within the digital space. And yeah, first of all, I would like to present some general issues over that, and then before that, I will move to the particular aspect of how pandemic shaping the digital issues in Timor-Leste and the particular context in there. So my presentations, I am not a part of something like on experts on the particular issue of IT like that, or has sharing any experience on the expertise on this particular area. Therefore, I will not speak on a very techno-deterministic way or proposing any technological vision about the society after the COVID-19, something like that. For us, as we observe, agriculture has become more and more digitalized. In this sense, we can say that even Timor-Leste, as a country that are located in the global south, under development, periphery, but it has been affected by the current global economic system, who are very financialized, very digitalizing, very corporatizing, and I think it is affecting also a country like Timor-Leste. And this is our culture, our society, our politics, our economy has become more digitalized, something like that. Even we have a degree of difference between Timor-Leste and some part of the region or country in the regions, for instance, like Singapore. Because in Dili, we can just go park everywhere, but in Singapore, you cannot go and park everywhere because you have to pay something like this, like this, like this. And so my view also, like as I say, I'm not from a technocratic background, something like that. I totally sometimes disagree with the ideas that say we are living in a golden age of technological evolution, acceleration, growth, and innovation, creativity, something like that. Because I agree with the idea that even we have a substantial growth, economic progress, technological progress, innovation, but at the same time, we are facing a long period, decades, almost 5 or 4 decades of long stagnation on the global economy systems. And that's because of our economy has become more and more concentrating, and the production and the capital and the economy as well has become more concentrating in a few hands and a few countries in the world. Therefore, we are observing that even we have a technological progress like that, but at the same time we are facing the stagnation. I think that that condition has affecting or create a new, we can say that a two binary or contradictory consequence on the economy or something like that. Because at the same time, the technological progress can bring creativity, innovation, or can help us doing some an easy work, something like that. But at the same time, it is also creating more a controlled society, a regulatory society, an administrative society, a society that are more conform, a society that are more normative, a society that are more passive, and there's a and also the economy, as we can conceive, once we investing more on the production for the sake of the productions, production for the sake of the profit, production for the sake of the commodity. And I think it is continually, even we have the technological progress, digitalization of the society, something like that, but it's continue to reinforcing the exploitation of the people, especially the working people, something like that. And it promoting more an alienation, automatizations of the society, fragmentation, fracture, something like that. I think that is a general situation that even my country also is facing a general situation like that. So back to this, I think those are the questions raise a very important questions, like can we have a technological or digital progress that can move forward equivalent and go hand in hand with the promotion of equality, with the promotion of equal distribution of resource, something like that, or technological process that are ensuring there is a freedom, there is autonomy of the individual, there is a democracy in the people. I think in the context of the pandemic and after the pandemic, what we have been perceive and see is that is a total the rise, the reinforcement, a more totalitarian state control over the social life and economy and so on. Back to Timor-Leste, there are only 3 points that I would raise in here about the pandemic and so on. I think we all already see how the pandemic affect mostly the working people, the poor people, the peasant people, something like that. And we already see those situations. And what the pandemic has affecting in Timor-Leste, because Timor-Leste is a society that are still organizing in a kinship way, in a communal way, collectivity way, because it is a agrarian society. Even we have, during the pandemic, it creates a crisis in impasse, it creates a deadlock of the society, and it provokes eruptions of the people. People are being revolt, protests against the government and the economy and so on. But at the same time, there are some transformation of political and social relations. I think we all experience this situation. There's like we have conceived in the first time in the history of Timor, or where the people are being locked down, and then the people has been organized in a very non-centralized forms of society, something like that. Because the society in Timor-Leste are very hierarchical, and once the pandemic, they locked down and then organized themselves. And it is the first time in which the private sphere became a political space of organizing the protest, advocacy, solidarity, and so on. On the second point is that even the society has been locked down, social space had been militarizing, the street has been fully by the police, something like that, and the people has been demobilized. locked into in the room, but there is a tendency of a resurgence of the popular initiative of participating in regional and international networking and initiatives, something like that. And I think this is the thanks to the technology, something like that also. I think this is the good side of the technology, how it can facilitate it. Refundations of new initiative by the people after a long decades of pacification, normativization, something like that. But here, the last point that I will raise in here is that about the internet situation in Timor-Leste. Once the lockdown, it also brings the economic slowdown in Timor-Leste. We can say that it's a great recession over the, or not a great recession, but some partial recession in Timor-Leste. But it also brings an internet slowdown in Timor-Leste. And I was part of the APC fellowship, and it is quite hard to participate online. And I always get, yeah. But the most, what is surprising us as a Timorese is that even the economy has become regress, something like that. The popular, the income of the popular people class in there has shrinking and shrinking, but at the same time, the profit by the telecommunication companies in Timor-Leste are grow up and rapidly during the 2 years of pandemic. I think there are two process of lockdown, like neoliberal or right-wing resurgence in my country, but there is also a neoliberal austerity that are imposing by the government and imposing by the private sector in Timor-Leste, which is promoting more public spending cutting, the wage cutting, something like that, spending on the health sector, education sector, or agriculture sector. But at the same time, there's a huge vast of wealth who are transferring from the public funding or for the people to the private companies, something like that. I think there's a three situation that we are facing in Timor-Leste, and we still have a time? Okay. There's another point that I will raise also in here. I think we usually discuss or talk about the big order, like my friend Darika has already mentioned about it, like state using the surveillance, something like that. But the things that sometimes we forgot is that the virtual order, like the surveillance capitalism, were participating of controlling our society, our behavior, something like that, who are very dominating during the pandemic and after the pandemic. So what we are thinking to, we have seen the various initiative by the state and by the market who are organizing the digitalization of the society. But there's a lack of process of how the community or the people lead to organizing the initiative or build up their own initiative of to conceive or reimagining a new way of digital society, something like that. I think that is what we are thinking and proposing as an alternative to countering the more marketizing, corporatizing, commercializing, or commodification within the digital process, which is affecting the rights of many peoples across the world, including in Timor-Leste, and so on. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fernando, for speaking about the broader context of digitization on all our countries, right? And then specifically the impact on an insular country like Timor-Leste, where unlike other countries in the region, the pandemic has in fact slowed down, as you said, adoption of the internet and digital technologies, which is quite different from what's happening elsewhere. And you also spoke about a question that I was going to put to the panel later on where do we go from here, but I'll come back to that. Before that, I'd like to come to you, Farooq, to talk specifically about the context in Bangladesh. And then perhaps we can take some questions from the audience after that. Thank you.
Thank you, the moderator and my fellow panelists and people who are listening here. I came on board in the last minute and I'll be very brief on that. I work for an organization called Article 19. It's an international organization headquartered in London, we work on freedom of expression and rights to know. From the very beginning of the pandemic, we were saying that people have the right to know about the situation for their own benefit, because this is something that affects everybody's life, okay? And we are also saying that government has to be transparent on this issue, because this is public health and public interest and public benefit, okay? I was in Hawaii when the pandemic started in China. By the time I came back to Bangladesh, the pandemic almost spread it out. But that was the year which was the 100th birth anniversary of the father of the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And they were planning for celebrating that for a long time. So the whole issue was that government tried to hide the fear of pandemic so that they can celebrate. Their plan was to declare the pandemic problem after the celebration, okay? That created a big problem. And also the digital area was affected, because some whistleblowers in Chittagong, a port city in Bangladesh, were talking to someone in Malaysia over the phone and said that I know some people were admitted in the hospital and died because of pandemic and because of that. And those people were picked up and put in the prison. So government tried to hide the information that pandemic has arrived in Bangladesh already. So that put the health issue in real danger. Second one was the corruption and the pandemic. Bangladesh is a very good country with lots of corruption on a high level, you know, and the people learned how to falsify testing results, how to make money, how to start new hospitals and blah, blah, blah. There was lots of corruptions. So there was again a kind of obstacle in the freedom of expression in that. The third one was that the one journalist went to the health ministry to get some document about contracts that Bangladesh government was about to sign with some foreign countries, China, Russia, whatever. And she was kept in the health ministry for the whole day, and they didn't know what to do with her because she had these things. So they were complaining that she was stealing state secrecy. But we have a very bad law in Bangladesh called Digital Security Act. As soon as you put something on the website, on your status, or on your blog, the government has the every right to harass you, detain you, take your equipment away. But this journalist was in the ministry and did not put anything on the website. So they didn't know which law could be effective to arrest this person. So a law that was created in the British period is like country secrecy exposure law or something like that. She was arrested under that. So there are only two cases in Bangladesh in these two under this law. One was that someone from Bangladesh went to Israel and he was arrested. And this is the second one that who went to the health ministry was arrested as well. So my final point is that when government is not transparent, government is authoritarian, and government thinks about their family and celebration of their father's birthday, and the citizens become very low. So freedom of expression and right to know on the health crisis in a digital era is very important. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Farooq, for bringing up those points and really, I guess, tying together some of the issues that our other panelists have spoken about as well, which is really the use of the opportunity that the pandemic provided to governments across the region to be able to tighten their control over people and spaces. And I think that is something that we see across the region, unfortunately. We have, I believe, about 12 to 13 minutes left. I want to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions. I know that there are a couple of questions online, but I wanted to check if okay, I see that there are a couple of questions here. Would you like to go first?
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Sopeng. I'm from Cambodia, and I'm really interested with the sharing session from the speaker. I want to hear from your perspective of the youth or activists should do or done after the post-pandemic that are related to digital right. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Is that directed at any one person or to the panel in general? To the panel in general, is there anyone who would like to take that up?
Thank you for that, my friend Sofeng. I think there's some huge political regression in Timor-Leste, especially in my country, because the NGO and social movement has become more and more bureaucratizing and more adopting the neoliberal ideologies such as competitiveness, something like that, and more accustomed with the ideas of the marketizing, something like that. And that's affecting the youth movement in Timor-Leste. The issue of the media in Timor-Leste has become more, previously, before the pandemic, has been more international, like focusing on how the big state using the media, the corporate media, influencing the small country like Timor-Leste. For instance, like Australian media, Indonesian media, something like that. But since the pandemic, the issue has been shifting toward more digital, something like that, toward on how the digital issues affecting the media, the educations, the sustainable development, something like that, the environmental issue, who are move beyond to the traditional issues that are dominating the old narrative by the previous actor. And I think in our case, Timor-Leste as well, in 2017, it is marking a generational shift between the old generations of the 60, 90, 70, and 90, and then a new baby boomers who grow up and see a new form of reality, and then they use digital rights, digital media, something like that, in a different new orientation of social activism. Yeah,
Thanks. Thank you, Fernando.
I think you want.
Yeah. Would you like to ask a question?
So, Tobias Siebig, Max Planck Institute for Informatics. I have a question to you. So, what I gathered from like the last parts of your presentation, do you think like an export ban on weaponized surveillance software, especially from Western nations, would be a thing to demand, like on a national level, international level?
Yeah, I think that is the issue that I have been thinking as well. And also when it's come to, I think also the question from the public chat, when it's come to that, we need to, I mean, the government is imported the surveillance technologies. The big problem is about the transparencies. We never know. We never know that kinds of like what they are using is, what the budgets, what is kinds of the safeguard that they are doing it. I think in terms of demand, actually, for example, the Pegasus spyware, that actually we found out that it's already happened in Thailand in 2018, but no one know in Thailand. Until that last year that some of the activists got the notifications from the Apple. That's one is, I mean, alert that become the attention, especially for the media outlet. But I think it's already happened for some times, but we didn't have, when it comes to the surveillance technologies, I think the most difficult thing is like, it's difficult to identify. I think that's why it needs a lot of, I mean, the effort on that. Of course, for the authoritarian government is a high demand for them. And I think it's not just only Thailand, but we have seen others country that, I mean, it's kind of the imported the technology as well as for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Darika. And I think that goes to Fred's question as well in the chat, I see. where he asks about the dangers of external actors who have access to this information when technology like this is imported. There's another question in the chat for Gaia, which I'll read out. The question is from Zana, who says, you spoke about the increasing awareness of Malaysian society with concerns to digital rights and data protection. Was wondering if you could share some initiatives on data and digital literacy in the country, if any, so that new entrants in digital rights can participate. Gaia,
should I take that question? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Zana. And I would, I should have mentioned it earlier in the opening as well, that while, we have from the state's point of view and also corporate sector's point of view, a lot of things that we are concerned about. I suppose the flip side and the good part of it is that we've seen actually very creative ways of advocacy and lobbying that have taken advantage of the digital platforms. And I think that has been a good sign. Also showing the opportunities for those who can think about alternative ways of presenting their causes. When I mentioned earlier about the interest in privacy and protection, I think also in the last 2 years, because of the pandemic, a lot more people are becoming more aware of the challenges to freedom of expression in the country and making use of these platforms, again, mediated platforms, corporate platforms, but to raise issues. And I think that with the new constitutional amendment that allows for younger voters in, there's definitely a lot of potential there. So we are seeing definitely a lot more conversations on social media. Again, not the same across the board. It is quite different, but definitely interest among younger voters, younger citizens, groups who want to take advantage of the tools for advocacy. And so training younger people when it comes to political awareness, there's definitely a lot more initiatives when it comes to fact-checking and digital media literacy. So that's actually a good development. Susanna, very specifically, either it involves universities, there are independent initiatives. I would stay away quite, far away from the government initiatives to fact-check because they are pretty much fact-checking themselves. So they're very biased in that sense because many reports have said that the main source of disinformation, misinformation actually comes from authorities and official sources. But independent initiatives are there when it comes to fact-checking, and I think that's actually a good place to begin. And youth-led digital media literacy is also something that I think has taken a lot more grounding. So maybe those are the two areas that sort of new entrants can look at. If I could quickly mention, yes, when it comes to surveillance and the transparency, that indeed is a problem. And because many of our countries will probably have very strict or very narrow definitions of national security, so a lot of this is framed as national security. We would want Western governments to actually check on their companies a lot more because the main source of surveillance is actually the Western countries rather than on the China. People like to talk about China as the big spyware, but actually it's the Western nations. So a lot more checking in there would actually do us a lot of help. And just on the issue of youth, I will not speak on behalf of the youth, and I will say that there are a lot more youth groups emerging in Malaysia, again, as a result of constitutional changes and the digital opportunities. I think we may see actually changes in the way issues are advocated, lobbying is happening, and I think that has some actually a positive potential, while not discounting the fact that, of course, a lot of them have also been at risk of doxing, of bullying, and also official harassment. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gaia. We're almost at the end of the session, but I do want to request Byoung-il for final thoughts as well, especially on this issue around transparency and surveillance in the Korean context.
Many other panels explain the cases of the authoritative government misuse the pandemic situation for their political purpose. And there are similar cases in South Korea, but the point I focused in this seminar was that even the quarantine measure, the measure which was adopted for the quarantine purpose, can be misused to infringe the fundamental rights of the people. And when it was adopted without enough discussion and I mean, many measure was adopted in South Korea without enough discussion in the name of urgency, and the National Assembly justified this measure by revising the law afterwards. So, and I think this pandemic situation will emerge in the future again and again. So we need to think about what is the good balance for the protection of public health and the protection of digital rights. And actually, there are many. Actually, we published several reports on COVID-19 and digital rights, and I share the URLs in the chat where you can download our report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Byoung-il. And thanks really to the panel. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, we're not able to take any more questions because we really are out of time on the session. But I do want to really thank the panel for sharing such detailed insights on the situation in your countries. I did want to speak a bit more about where we can go from here, but I know because of how complex the situation in all of the countries are, we didn't really get around to that. But I do want to take the point that Byoung-il made that, look, this might not be the only pandemic, this might not be the only situation of crisis, and we know what these situations of crisis does to our democracies and to public participation and to our rights, and so perhaps this is an opportunity for us to prepare for the future. And I want to end on a positive note, so I want to take what Gaia and Fernando said about the fact that at least the pandemic has meant that there is more awareness among people about their rights, about issues like data privacy and protection, the fact that it has been an opportunity for young people to come together, to get involved in activism, and perhaps that's our way forward. With that, I want to thank everyone once again. Thank you all so much for joining us, including our participants online. Thank you.
Thank you.